Christmas Eve trying to find some batteries for my boyfriend's present for the next day. So yeah, the day it got away from me. But it's actually a really good thing because now I'm like an entire week ahead of schedule research wise. So from now on, uploads are going to be super smooth sailing, which is very, very good, both for me and both for you. Also, an absolutely huge thank you. We have reached 1,000 subscribers, which is just crazy to me. We actually reached that on Christmas Day as well, so that was like the best Christmas present from all of you guys that are supporting me. Thank you so much. For this year, 1,000 subs, I didn't think that I would reach it quite so quickly as I have, and I think this year maybe a good goal would be 5,000 subs, and it would be amazing if you could be part of that journey with me. And so if you do like today's video, feel free to subscribe and like, just because it lets me know that you guys are all enjoying this content. If you are new to this channel, hi, it's lovely to have you here with us. I really like creating ASMR true crime videos among other ASMR generic content, just because I think it gives true crime fans a chance to enjoy that sort of content in a little bit more of a relaxing environment, because I know we all do love a good documentary, but at times they can be a little bit too scary. So if you still want to get a good fix of true crime, but you might be winding down for the night, then I think my channel is probably perfect for you. So if you do, like I said, if you do like today's video, feel free to subscribe and join this community that we're building here. With all of that being said, we will get into today's video, but first of all, disclaimer, you are gonna get really fed up. I keep saying this every single week, but it is super important for you guys to know. We are going to be talking about super sensitive content when I film these videos. Obviously it's true crime, we're talking about murder, assault, some really gory details, and if that sort of stuff isn't for you, if it's going to trigger you in any sort of way, then I suggest looking elsewhere on my channel or even somebody else's channel for more generic content, just because I don't want to cause any harm. It is intended for a mature audience, so if you are under the age of say 14, please just get out of here, because what we talk about in these kind of videos isn't going to be suitable for you, I'm afraid. So today's video, what are we talking about? Well, if you saw our last episode, it was about Charles Manson, and that was the part 1, and this is the part 2 to that video. If you didn't see my last true crime upload, I'd recommend you go and watch that. I'll put it up here for you. Otherwise, all of this probably isn't going to make any sense, and you'll be quite confused. So yeah, if you haven't watched that, go over that. But if you did watch last week's video, you might still need a bit of a recap. If that's the case, again, go watch a little bit of it and then come back here. Alright, so our last video, it ended with Bobby being arrested for the murder of Gary Heineman. He was caught while driving one of Gary's cars away from the property, and yeah, he was arrested for the murder. Bobby was of course a member of the Manson family though, and if you remember about what we spoke about in last week's video, the whole reason why this cult had been brought together was the idea of unity and oneness. This was Charles Manson's sort of main belief. He wanted them to stick up for each other and be like a family, hence we are calling them the Manson family. And you know, once Bobby was arrested, this definitely made Charles more paranoid, because he thought that everything would then be led straight back to him, and so he needed to devise a plan to get Bobby out of this situation. The group then thought that the best plan here would be to kill again, and so they would stage a copycat murder, which would then lead investigators to believe that whoever friends. So along with Sharon, there was her ex-fiance and friend, hairstylist Jay Spring, coffee heiress Abigail Folger, and she was also there with her boyfriend. I'm really going to butcher this pronunciation. Wojciech Frykowski. I'm sorry if that's completely wrong. But there was also another man there named Stephen Parent who was visiting the home, and he was actually like the caretaker of the property at the time. I'm sorry, I feel like I keep looking at my notes quite a lot, but there's just a lot of names there. So on this night, the Manson family members, Tex, Pat, Linda and Susan, they all get into their car and they drive to this house. Now Charles had actually told them to do everything that Tex had said, but he doesn't tell the rest of them what the plan was. They had no idea that they were going there that night to murder. When they arrived at the property, it was very late at night, and unfortunately Steve Parent, he was just getting into his car when Tex, he notices him. So Steve, he becomes his very first victim, and as he was putting his keys in the ignition of his car to drive home, Tex, he goes and he shoots Stephen Parent, and he shoots him 4 times. After this shooting, Tex, he goes back to his own car and he tells the others to join him inside the property. The way Tex gets into the house was through an unlocked door. Why the door was unlocked, I don't know, but it was. And Tex, he is trying to deal with Jay Spring first in the living room because that's who he came across first. And he was trying to restrain him on the floor, and then Tex, he had let the others into the house and he asked Susan to check the back rooms and to basically collect everyone in the living room. So Tex and Jay, they begin to fight in this living room because Jay is obviously trying to struggle and trying to escape. But again, Tex, he then sadly, he just went ahead and shot him like he did with Stephen Parent. It was revealed that it was Tex who did do the majority of the killings that night, but that each of the family members, they'd all participated in some sort of way to help. In the end, everybody in the house on that night was brutally murdered, which it was just, it made it even more traumatic because they shouldn't have been trying to kill Terry Mulcher in the first place. Don't get me wrong, if it was just him that had died, obviously it's still a huge deal, you're still murdering somebody, but for that many people to be in this house all at the wrong time, and for this cult to still then just murder them all in cold blood, you know, that's not what they'd been sent to this house to do, and yet still they just took the lives of so many innocent people, which it was all for nothing. In Sharon Tate's blood, the word pig was written on the front door. Again, they had done this so that they could try and tie all of these murders back to the Black Panther group and to frame them. And remember, the whole reason that they are doing this is because of the murder of Bernard Crowe. Again, as we discussed in the last video, Bernard Crowe, he's not dead. Charles Manson just believes him to be so. So again, it makes this entire killing spree just even more stupid and meaningless. They not only killed all of these people in cold blood when they were supposed to only be killing one person, Terry Mulcher, but they had done all of this because they had believed that they had killed another man who wasn't truly dead, if that makes sense. Again, if you need to recap on our last video, go ahead and do that. It is a little bit confusing, this one, but yeah, it didn't make any sense. Bernard Crowe, he wasn't even dead. Of course, Charles, he would still be in like huge trouble for shooting him, but at this point, they hadn't killed anybody in the first place, and yet this was the first true killing that Charles had done and that he had planned, and the whole reason, it really was truly for nothing. In total, the victims at this house had been stabbed 110 because, you know, they probably weren't as human as they used to be before this cult. They all probably had this crazy mentality now, and they were just in it for themselves. You know, perhaps it got to a point where they were actually finding pleasure in carrying out all of these murders just because they were all that messed up. Who knows? But yeah, each and every single one of these murders was just carried out in the most brutal way for no reason. Now, due to the nature of this crime, you know, Sharon Tate, she was a huge Hollywood actress, like I said, so when the story hit the media, it was absolutely massive. The public thought that this killing had been done in some sort of satanic ritual. It made Hollywood terrified. Celebrities thought that there was this group going around hunting them down and that they would be the next victims. It was believed that Charles had made these family members so involved in the Tate murders so that they couldn't speak or snitch about the Bernard or Gary Heineman murder that was mainly Charles's own doing and fault. But now he seemed to be using these crimes to then not only try and frame the Black Panthers, but to also have his cult even more in his own pocket and to gain further control of them all. Like I said, back at the crime scene, the cult, they were hoping the police would be making all of these connections between all of these murders and that it would lead them to the Black Panther group. But unfortunately for them, the police, they never made their intended link. So these plans, they'd completely fell through, and all of this killing, again, it truly was for nothing. It didn't benefit them in any kind of way. It just made them even more and more guilty. So the following night, another murder was being planned. Highly logical. The cult, they still believe that their only way out of all of this, out of Bernard Grove's murder, is to continue with further murder sprees. So their next genius plan was to murder the grocery company executive Leno LaBianca and his wife Rosemary. They lived together at their home in Los Angeles, and on the night of this plan, Leslie Van Houten had went along to prove her loyalty to Charles, and she said that before going, she knew that a murder was going to take place and that she wanted to be the one to do it because she wanted to prove to Charles just how dedicated and loyal she truly was. So the members of the group, Leslie, Pat, Linda, Tex, Susan, and Charles himself, they all travelled in the same car and they drove around for a little while until they got to the house of the next victims. Charles, he entered the house first, actually tying up the LaBiancas and then leaving the property, and then the rest of the Manson family members, they went inside and they struggled with the LaBiancas. The girls, like I said, Leslie Van Houten, she wanted to prove her loyalty, and so it would be the girls that originally had planned to do the murdering, but last minute they chickened out and they couldn't do it, and they asked Tex to then come in and kill them instead. So he killed both the husband and wife, and then the girls, they took knives and stabbed them too. this huge popular band, probably like the biggest band at their time. They thought that would be the reason why the murder would be linked back to Sharon Tate, because she was a huge Hollywood actress and she too was very famous. Don't ask me, I don't know what that logic was. I don't know what they were thinking during any of this. None of it makes sense, but that's what they thought would help the police connect the two dots. Anyway, it was said that the reason they had chose to kill again was because they themselves didn't realise how big the Tate murders were going to become because of the media. When I say the Tate murders, I'm referring to Sharon Tate, of course, but not just Sharon Tate, but all of the people that were killed that night. That's what it's called. People just relate to them as the Tate murders, besides only Sharon Tate being the only Tate to have been killed. I don't know, that's what I mean when I say the Tate murders here. But yeah, it was supposed to just be Terry Mulcher dying that night, remember? And so they really hadn't given it any thought at all as to what the consequences would be for them. But of course, like I said, this case was all over the news at the time, and it was really all anybody would be talking about, and this hadn't resulted in the success of their plan. And so this is why they felt that they needed to carry out yet another murder, the LaBiancas. And this might seem like a really random pick, but it wasn't at all. Remember, like I said in the last video, Charles Manson was the worst for holding grudges, and Charles had apparently picked the LaBiancas home within reason due to yet another grudge. It was not a random pick at all. The LaBiancas, they'd actually lived next door to a man named Harold True. Now, we don't really need to know much about Harold True, who he was, yada yada yada, besides the fact that he had been a really good friend to Charles and the Manson family. They had previously stayed at Harold's house for a little while, but they were causing too much havoc in the neighbourhood, probably listening to the music too loud and all of the partying and whatnot. And so the police, they were called upon by Harold's neighbours, leading to the family being evacuated and forced to leave Harold's home. Who were these neighbours? Well, if you haven't put two and two together, of course they were the LaBiancas. So this pick of Charles, it wasn't random at all. He still had plenty of motivation and reason as to why the LaBiancas would be his next victim. Due to their wealth, Charles had also remembered that the LaBiancas had a habit of gambling, and so they had lots of money at this point. And remember, he was in desperate need of paying back the Straight Satans, the motorcycle gang that they had used for protection previously. Now, over the years, during multiple interviews and questioning, Charles had actually said that he had nothing to do with the LaBianca's murder, that he hadn't gone in the house, and that he wasn't involved in any way. But of course, everybody else, the rest of the family members involved, they ended up snitching on him, and they said that he was actually the one who had driven the car there. And not only that, once he had been in the house and tied up the LaBiancas, that he had stolen a wallet from Rosemary LaBianca. Once the murders were over, Charles then took himself and the members Ranch, which was in Death Valley. Extremely fitting. And it was basically like an old mining property that was, again, it was very cut off from the rest of the world and society, and nobody was around. They couldn't see what they were doing, or they could continue getting up to no good without any onlookers. Then on the 12th of October 1969, officers raided the Barker Ranch on suspicion of auto theft again. This time 24 members were arrested, and the police, they still had no idea that it was the family that was involved with all of these murders, and they had no reasons as to suspect this. They were arrested purely just for the auto theft at this time. However, one of the members, Susan Atkins, she let something slip while she was doing her jail time. She had stupidly told her cellmates that she and the rest of the family were involved with the murder of Sharon Tate. She sort of seemed to brag about it, as well as though she was pleased with herself and the family, like it was some sort of sick achievement. And of course, the cellmate, she then snitches on Susan in hopes of lessening her own sentence. And this is where the family's world, it now just completely begins to fall apart. In December of 1969, 4 months after the crimes, Charles Manson and 5 members of the family were being charged with both the Tate murders and the LaBianca murders. On the 15th of June 1970, the trial then begins, and Charles Manson, he actually asks to be his own attorney, but he was denied this. Susan Atkins, she gave a testimony, and she was able to describe in great detail exactly what had happened on the night of the Tate murders. Doing so, she showed little emotion or remorse for her actions. Now, although Susan Atkins' testimony would help to convict the family of these murders, they didn't want to use her as a witness because they thought it wouldn't help the Helter Skelter story that the prosecutors wanted to focus on. This is what I'm going to go on to and explain in a moment. So they told her just to sit back down, and she wasn't used as a proper witness. The main issue here was that Charles Manson himself was not at the scene for the Tate murders, and he also didn't participate in the actual killings of the LaBiancas either. So they had tried to get him using just circumstantial evidence and the law of conspiracy, but this was a much more difficult and riskier job to do. They basically had no proof that he had any part in any of these murder sprees at all. The investigators, they therefore had to think outside of the box and create a storyline that would truly convict Charles Manson. Hollywood and the media were, of course, going mad about this whole trial, and every day that Charles would come into court, he would be filmed and he would be all over the news. He would come out with all sorts of rubbish and crazy things, because he clearly knew that this case had a lot of attention, and it was a great opportunity for him to mess with everybody, and he wanted this attention too. He would have these weird stare-offs with the camera and jury members because he knew it would get more attention and annoy people. He was able to make them feel really uncomfortable, and at trial he came across as very aggressive and intimidating, and people, they just thought he was like a complete and utter weirdo at this point. But of course, this whole demeanour, it was brilliant for the media. They knew this case would gain all of this attention down to Charles's weird behaviour and acts. Every day, Charles and the girls, they would therefore meet before going into the courtroom to discuss their next weird strategies. For instance, one day he wanted them to all stand up and hold hands, I guess, some sort of strange symbol of unity again, and another time he wanted them to sing his songs or just scream at the jury, and this video and the last video wasn't like the truth. They didn't think that that really happened. They thought that this was the true story. So the prosecutor for the trial, Vincent Bugliosi, he was said to be a very good prosecutor. He was also a known ladies' man, and he himself loved the attention. He brought another man with him during the court proceedings, which most people at first they thought it must just be some sort of assistant. And during all of the trials, he would be there writing notes. But in reality, this extra man, he was actually there to help Vincent write a book all about the case. He didn't tell anybody about this till after the whole case was over. But yeah, he brings in this man and he's taking notes the entire time. Now, the Helter Skelter story that was presented in court was the idea that Charles Manson had built a cult who, it was full of people that didn't want to be a part of day-to-day society. He was obsessed with the Beach Boys and he wanted to become a famous musician. He thought that the Beatles were everything, and through the Beach Boys, this is how he eventually met Terry Melcher, as we've previously discussed. And this man, he stole Charles's music and he came to represent the establishment for Charles as well. Everything that Charles hated about society, in Charles's mind, this is what Terry Melcher represented. Charles, of course, he hated this whole idea of the establishment, and he truly believed that the Beatles, they were predicting this race war through hidden messages in their songs, and he was desperate to prepare for this race war. And so he begins to brainwash all of his loyal followers. He ordered them to kill Gary Heineman, and then he ordered them to kill white people and frame black people for their murders. Hence his followers, they killed everybody they could at Terry Melcher's house, all of the Tate murders. So this is what this story, this whole Helter Skelter storyline believes. It wasn't because of this drug deal gone wrong with Bernard Crowe. That wasn't Charles's reasoning or motivation behind carrying out all of these other murders. He wanted to instead kill white people, even though his first victim was a black man, Bernard Crowe. Obviously, it wasn't a successful victim. He didn't die, remember? But yeah, this storyline, it spun the story so that it was believed that Charles Manson, he was killing all of these white people so that he could frame black people, so that he was prepared for this race war, if that makes sense. He did, like we've discussed so far, he did believe that a race war was going to happen, and he was really paranoid about it. But he wasn't trying to just frame black people for murders. He was trying to frame specifically the Black Panther gang, remember, because they thought that they were going to come after him because of his attempted murder of Bernard Crowe. I hope all of this is making sense, because this is where it starts to get a little bit confusing, okay? So we've got two different storylines running. Again, if you need a little bit of a recap, head over to that video. But yeah, so this storyline, it went along with the idea that he was brainwashing his loyal followers to kill all of these white people and then frame black people for their murders. Then Charles's plan was to pick another murders, hence leaving those hidden messages and lyrics from the White Album by the Beatles at the crime scene. And this would then lead to like a race war. Okay, but when this race war would begin, Charles and his family would then hide in this desert until it was over and then they were safe again. Then Charles, he would come out of hiding to become the leader of the Black Army and rebuild the world. I really hope I haven't lost you there through any of that. But basically, yeah, we've got two storylines here. One being this Helter Skelter story that I'm describing now, and that, like I said, a lot of people think that this was the truth and this was Charles Manson's reasoning and motivations behind all of these murder sprees. But the other storyline was the whole drug deal gone wrong scenario with Bernard Crow, and personally that's what I believe is the most reasonable because it's the most logical. Don't get me wrong, Charles Manson, like I said, he did think that a race war was going to happen, but that's what was causing all of this paranoia in the first place with him. But I don't think the whole reasoning behind all of these murders was this whole idea of a race war. I hope that makes sense. So, this summarised, it was the ultimate story, which then convicted Charles Manson and gained Vincent Bugliosi fame and fortune through the book he wrote, which he named Helter Skelter, based on these events. So like I said, this whole storyline was created. There's obviously some truths and facts used throughout it, don't get me wrong. Charles Manson, he was definitely, he would definitely be a racist and a very highly disturbed individual. There's a lot to this story which I haven't explained just because there's so much to it, but in order to get the general gist of things, you don't need to know it. But yeah, he was definitely a racist and a highly disturbed individual, and this reason as to why Charles Manson chose to commit his crimes, it made for an astounding story, but the bigger outcome was that it had set Charles Manson up perfectly for first-degree murder and conspiracy under California law. Without this whole Helter Skelter storyline, there was no evidence at all that Charles wanted to make these murders happen, or that he had even participated in them. So the only real way to get him convicted was to enhance what had actually happened. Charles's plan to start a race war would make him easily responsible for all of these crimes committed, and if the prosecution had even mentioned to the court the auto thefts, the drugs, the killing, the shooting of Bernard Crow, then this whole Helter Skelter story, it wouldn't have made any sense, and Charles, he wouldn't have been convicted. Nothing was even mentioned about these events or these other crucial parts of information during the trial because they couldn't risk it. If someone had blabbered about these things, it would have led to reasonable doubt, and it could have possibly encouraged the jury to believe that it had something to do with this drug deal gone wrong, but they could have also dismissed this whole idea of there ever being a cult. You know, they could have thought maybe none of this was Charles Manson's fault, and of course the prosecution didn't want this idea circulating about. The whole job, of course, is to get Charles Manson arrested, and of course he was a danger to society, and I think everybody can agree that this man needed to be put behind bars. So the prosecution team, they really did need to make up an elaborate story for this to be the final result, and it's a good job that they did. Of course, this whole Helter Skelter story, it did blow up and it was massive. Everybody was talking about it and how scary it was, and in the end it did become the story that defined the Charles Manson case, but many believed, even during that time, that it wasn't even true. The whole court hearing, it was a big mess. Eventually though, on the 29th of March, Charles Manson was charged with 7 as much of a punishment, I think, because remember in the early days he didn't even want to leave prison. He thought it was his home, and so being back in prison, it really wasn't a miserable life for him. He honestly didn't seem to mind it. So that's another really sad fact about this whole case. Charles Manson, you could say he was never really truly punished. Over the years, the women had taken part in interviews during their time behind prison walls, and they actually did all end up showing some sort of remorse for what they had done. Obviously, they had all matured and grown, and eventually they'd come to their senses. Not Charles though, he never did come to his senses. He never owned up and said that, you know, what part he played in the whole thing. He never did truly confess himself, and he would say over and over until his dying day that he had never told the girls what to do, that they had made all of these choices for themselves, and that still he had absolutely nothing to do with any of it. And that's probably why so many people are so fascinated with this case today, and why Charles Manson is just so infamous, because in reality he never did actually ever murder anybody himself. He had always gotten everybody else to do his dirty work for him, besides the Bernard Crowe shooting incident, of course. Another thing to note is that the Helter Skelter story, it really just added to it. I think for some reason people are so fascinated by cults. I'd be lying if I said that I wasn't fascinated by cults, because I think it's something that you see a lot in films and TV shows and all of that stuff, but in reality you forget that these things do exist, and that there is these crazy people running around with crazy ideas and ideologies, you know, in these terrifying groups, and God knows how many cults there is out there and what they're planning. Like, it is a really scary thought. So yeah, it's no wonder Charles Manson's story, it just gained so much attention back then and even now. In 1974, Vincent Bugliosi, the prosecutor, was now an author because he had finally released the Helter Skelter book, and fun fact, it actually became the best-selling true crime book in history, and it sold over 7 million copies. Like I said, there was just so many things that happened and went on during this case, but I already know, like, these videos were going to be so long to make anyway, just because, you know, like I said, it's just a huge case. But if you guys want to do your own research on all of the rest of the details, I'd highly suggest it, because this, like I said, there's just so much out there to the story, and you know I love to include as much detail as possible if you've seen any of my other previous videos, but I would have been here talking for days, which unfortunately I just can't do. So yeah, if you want to go do your own research, go ahead and do that. But just a fun fact to end things on. I feel like I need to stop saying fun fact because it feels inappropriate, you know. We're talking about murder and a fun fact, but I don't really know how else to, you know, it's just a habit. I always say fun fact, but anyway, some of Charles Manson's followers, they actually do still remain in prison to this day. And for Charles himself, he had remained in prison until the age of 83, and then he died on the 19th of November 2017 in prison from natural causes. So yeah, he is no longer alive. I hope you enjoyed. I always say I hope you enjoyed the video, but it's really not. I don't think it's the right word. I hope you are intrigued by this video, because that is it for the story of Charles Manson. I hope you enjoyed me rambling on again today. If you did, like I said, feel free to give this video a big thumbs up for me, just because it really helps helps out my channel